The night was cold, and the wind howled through the dark alleyways of the bustling city. Rain drizzled softly, dampening the worn-out hoodie, clinging to the small frame of a girl, no older than 12. Her name was Sophie. She had no home, no family, just the tattered backpack slung over her shoulder, filled with whatever little she had left. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she had grown used to that feeling. What she couldn't get used to was the loneliness. The world had turned, its back on her, but she had one thing keeping her going: hope. That night, hope came in the form of a wild, desperate idea. The city's private airport was just a few miles away, where luxury jets lined up, preparing to take off to places she had only seen in magazines left behind at bus stops. She had no ticket, no plan, just a dream of escaping this cruel life, even if it meant sneaking onto one of those jets and hiding away. Maybe, just maybe, she could start over somewhere far away. Her heart pounded as she neared the airport fence. A few feet away, a group of men in uniform stood talking, their backs turned to her. Sophie took a deep breath and seized the moment. She slipped through an opening in the fence, her small size making it easier. She crouched low, moving swiftly between parked cars and stacks of luggage crates. Every second felt like an eternity as she held her breath, afraid that at any moment someone would yell, point, and drag her away. Then she saw it. A sleek, white private jet stood on the runway, its engines humming as if preparing for departure. It was enormous, pristine, the kind of plane that belonged to someone with more money than she could ever imagine. A billionaire, maybe. It didn't matter. All she cared about was finding a way in. Luck, or fate, was on her side. A worker had left the cargo hatch slightly open. Sophie's pulse raced. This was her chance. She glanced around, then darted toward the plane. With a quick, careful movement, she hoisted herself up, slipping inside just before the hatch was fully secured. The cargo hold was cold, dimly lit, and filled with neatly arranged suitcases and storage compartments. She squeezed herself into a small space behind some luggage, curling up as tightly as she could. Her heart thumped so loudly she was sure someone would hear it. She forced herself to stay still, barely breathing, as the plane rumbled beneath her. Then, the impossible happened. The plane started moving. Sophie had done it. She was actually leaving. But where was she going? As the jet ascended into the sky, she finally allowed herself a small smile. For the first time in a long time, she felt something close to relief. Maybe she'd wake up somewhere warm, somewhere safe, somewhere she could finally stop running. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly predicted, was that she wasn't just on any private jet. She was on the private jet of Ethan Carter, one of the wealthiest and most powerful businessmen in the country. And she was about to be discovered. The hum of the jet's engines filled the air, a steady vibration that made Sophie feel both weightless and trapped at the same time. She curled up tighter behind the luggage, her breathing slow and quiet. The air in the cargo hold was colder than she expected, and the thin fabric of her hoodie did little to keep her warm. But she didn't care. She was on a plane. She was leaving everything behind. She tried not to think about what would happen if she got caught. Would they throw her off the plane mid-air? Of course not, but they could land, turn her over to security, or worse, send her back to the streets where she had spent too many nights alone. She swallowed the lump in her throat. No, she had to stay hidden. She just needed to figure out where they were going. Above her, muffled voices carried through the floor. The luxurious cabin of the jet was occupied, though she couldn't tell how many people were on board. She recognized one voice, firm, confident, commanding. It had to be the owner of the jet, Ethan Carter. The name was familiar. Even though she never had a phone or internet, she had seen his face on newspapers left on cafe tables and billboards flashing in the city. A billionaire businessman. People said he was ruthless in business, but beyond that, she didn't know much about him. Sophie felt a sharp pang of anxiety. If someone like Ethan Carter found her, what would he do? She doubted he had much patience for a stowaway, let alone a homeless girl, sneaking onto his jet. Suddenly, footsteps echoed above. They were getting closer. A door opened, and then a voice. "Check the cargo hold before we land." Her stomach dropped. There wasn't much time. She frantically looked around. The space was too small to hide anywhere new, and moving might make noise. She pressed herself against the suitcases, making herself as small as possible. A few seconds later, the cargo hatch hissed as it unlocked. Light flooded in. A man in a uniform climbed down, holding a flashlight. He scanned the area, moving with the precision of someone who had done this 100 times. The beam of light passed over the luggage, over the walls. Then, just inches from where Sophie was curled up, she held her breath. The light lingered. Then, as if fate intervened, the jet hit a slight turbulence bump. The man grumbled, steadied himself, and muttered, "All clear." He turned, climbed back up, and the hatch sealed shut again. Sophie exhaled so slowly she barely made a sound. That was close, too close. But relief didn't last long. The jet started its descent. Wherever they were going, they would land soon. And once the luggage was unloaded, it would only be a matter of time before someone found her. She needed a plan. Her fingers trembled from the cold as she unzipped her backpack. Inside, there wasn't much. Just a few dollars in change, a granola bar she had saved, and a small crumpled photo of her mother. Her chest tightened as she stared at it. She barely remembered her mother's face now. Everything felt like a blur of loss and survival. She blinked away the thoughts. This wasn't the time to get emotional. The plane landed smoothly. Sophie braced herself. She could hear activity outside. Voices giving instructions. Equipment moving. Any second now, the luggage would be removed. She needed to move. Carefully, she peeked through a small gap between the suitcases. A worker was unlocking the cargo hatch again, this time with a few more people waiting to unload. Sophie's heart raced. Then, before she could do anything, the luggage shifted. A hand reached in, and then a voice. "Wait, what the?" The moment felt frozen in time. The worker had spotted her. His eyes widened, and Sophie felt like a trapped animal, unsure whether to run or beg. But before anything could happen, another voice, firm, authoritative, spoke from behind him. "What's going on?" Sophie turned her head, her breath catching in her throat. Standing at the entrance of the cargo hold, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, was Ethan Carter himself, and he was looking right at her. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as Ethan Carter's piercing gaze locked onto her. For a moment, no one spoke. The worker looked between them, clearly unsure of what to do. Sophie's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She thought about running, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped. Ethan took a slow step forward, his expression unreadable. Up close, he looked just like the pictures she had seen. Sharp features, well-groomed, and the kind of presence that made people nervous. But there was something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Not anger, not even annoyance, just curiosity. "What?" he said, his voice calm but firm. "Are you doing on my jet?" Sophie opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had rehearsed a dozen excuses in her head, but now, under his scrutiny, None of them seemed convincing. Finally, she swallowed hard and whispered, I needed to get away. Ethan studied her for a long moment. Then, he sighed and turned to the worker. Give us a moment. The man hesitated, but nodded, stepping away. The cargo hold felt smaller now, the tension thick. Ethan crouched to her level. You stowed away on my plane. That's not exactly legal. Sophie looked down, gripping the straps of her backpack. I didn't mean any harm. I had nowhere else to go. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. He didn't ask where she had come from, didn't demand answers. Instead, he studied her, as if trying to understand something. Then, after a pause, he stood up and extended a hand. Come on, he said simply. Sophie hesitated. This was it. Either she trusted him, or she braced for whatever consequences were coming. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out and took his hand. Inside the private jet's luxurious cabin, Sophie felt out of place. Everything was spotless, expensive. She perched on the edge of a leather seat, still clutching her backpack, as if someone might take it away. Ethan sat across from her, watching her carefully. You don't have anyone, do you? He asked. Sophie shook her head. He leaned back, exhaling. I should call security. Her stomach twisted. But, he continued, I won't. She looked up, startled. Why? Ethan studied her again, then reached for a glass of water on the table. Because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go. His voice was quieter now, different from before. I didn't grow up with wealth. People think I did, but they don't know the full story. I worked my way up from nothing. I know what it feels like to be invisible. Sophie's grip on her backpack loosened. She had expected anger, maybe even pity, but not this, not understanding. So, what happens now? She asked hesitantly. Ethan took a sip of water, thinking. Then, he placed the glass down and looked at her with a serious expression. That depends. If I send you back, where would you go? Sophie's silence was answer. Enough. Ethan sighed again, rubbing his temples. Finally, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a call. Mark, cancel my meetings for the next few hours. I have something to take care of. He ended the call and looked back at her. We're going to figure this out. Sophie's eyes widened. You mean, you're not kicking me out? Ethan shook his head. Not until I know you're safe. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sophie felt the weight on her chest ease. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. As the jet continued its journey, the city below disappearing into the horizon, Sophie realized something. Maybe this wasn't just an escape. Maybe it was the start of something new, something she had never truly known before. A second chance.